I think I made a few people mad on TikTok. It is so soft. It's softer than any yarn I've ever worked with. I drafted up the pattern to see the color combination on Google Slides, actually. Hello, my name is Carla. I've been knitting for 12 months, so these are my projects. I'm in Manila right now, where my family and I are from. I just got in last night, so I'm a little bit jet lagged. I'm sitting in a hotel right now. It's the holiday season. My friends are super busy, but I convinced them to do a little one-night staycation with me in a hotel. We're gonna get dinner, we're gonna go to the spa tomorrow, and it'll be a lot of fun. The first 4 projects I'm gonna talk about are finished objects. I finished making all my Christmas presents for my family. I actually gave them to them over Thanksgiving, so it's all done. It was quite an adventure. There were some ups and downs. I put a lot of details about it in my last vlog, but I'm still gonna talk about the highlights here. So the main theme of these projects was running out of yarn. The original plan was to use 100 grams for each of the projects. I quickly found out that is not a lot of yarn, and so I made a lot of adjustments along the way. So the first project that I worked on was the feather and fan lace scarf that I made for my mom. I used yarn from the Sewrella spring collection in the classic sock base, which is about 400 yards per 100 grams. I used the colorway Normandy for this scarf. The lace pattern I used is called the feather and fan stitch. It's a really simple lace stitch. I did 3 repeats and I had selvage stitches along the edges. I learned a lot from doing the scarf. It was my first time doing a full lace piece. It was my first time blocking lace and seeing it bloom. I really didn't know how much it was going to grow, so it was kind of trial and error there. I think I knit it to about 5 feet, but it grew to about 5.5, something like that. It grew quite a bit. And it grew in width as well as in length. The lace just got so much prettier after blocking. What I learned from this is that, like I said, 100 grams is not that much yarn, even with lace. I got it to be a reasonable size, but it's not super long. It's definitely more of a fashion piece or a spring scarf. I don't think it would keep you that warm in the winter time, but I think it turned out really nice. The next scarf I worked on is the scarf number 4 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. I did this one in the color Saint-Tropez, also from the Sewrella spring collection. This one was a fingering weight. All of the yarns I used were fingering weight yarns, but I held this one double to make DK. As nobody could have possibly predicted, I also ran out of yarn for this one. I ended up taking a mini in the same color and adding that into the scarf. So I ended up using something like 120 grams instead of 100 grams. So the adjustments I made included adding an additional 20-gram mini skein into the yarn that I used. I also took out 2 of the repeats to make it use a little less yarn. So I ended up using something like 120 grams of fingering weight yarn held double to make this scarf. I think it looked so nice. I loved the pattern. I loved working on it. It was not too difficult, but it kept my attention, and it does wrap twice around the neck. So it actually, I would say that this one would keep you warm. It covers a lot of area for the amount of yarn that it uses because it wraps twice and like ties neatly around the neck. My sister-in-law loved it and she used it around New York, and I think it looked really great on her. The next project is the musselburgh hat by ysolda teague. This one is probably my record for the most frogging and knitting surgery that I've ever done. I'm being kind of dramatic. Most of this was my fault, but it was definitely a lot of work. I'm really just not that experienced, and I think that gauge trips me up a lot. I'm either not that good at keeping consistent gauge or I'm not that good at measuring it. I'm not really sure. So I talk about this a lot in detail in the vlog, but basically I ended up knitting a size that was way too big, and then I was using way too much yarn, and I realized that the gauge that I thought I had was wrong. I ended up having to frog it and change the gauge, change the size I was making, and start again. One reason why this happened, I think, is that I held the yarn double, making this a DK hat, which on one hand made it really nice and warm. On the other hand, I think the granularity of gauges for DK is not that fine grained. So for fingering weight yarns, if you did like 8 stitches per inch versus 9 stitches per inch versus 10 stitches per inch, those are pretty granular steps in gauge. So picking one of those three would give you a pretty accurate size. But I think that with DK, if you had like 5 versus 6 versus 7 stitches per inch, there's actually a huge difference between those. So if you measure your gauge wrong, you'll end up making a hat that's way too big or way too small. So I ended up making one that was way too big. I had to frog back and then make it again and finish that up. Then I think this is my fault. I ran out of yarn. I didn't make it big enough. I think maybe at this point I overestimated how much superwash would grow. So when I finished it, I think it ended up being much too short, and you definitely couldn't fold the brim over. It still fit me, so I thought it would be okay. I had my dad wear it and it fit, just there was no bump on top, and I think he really wanted to have a little bit of a bump on top, so I offered to make it bigger. So what I ended up doing was I cut into the middle. I added like maybe 4 more inches of stockinette. I made the musselburgh hat out of earth yarn in 16 fingering. I used the colors N50 and N100, which are a purplish gray and an ivory white. This was 100% superwash merino. This one is actually super soft. I really like this one. My plan was to make the musselburgh hat in 2 tones, one which was a mix of white and gray, and the other was just gray. And I planned to have the gray section be longer so that I could fold the brim over and have one side be fully gray and one side be gray and white with a gray brim. If you know the musselburgh hat pattern, that should hopefully make sense to you. So when I cut into the hat, I decided we weren't gonna go for a folded brim anymore. I'm not sure if in general this yarn is expected to grow while blocking and then shrink again, or if it shrunk because it was kind of drying next to the heater. So I'm still not completely sure how superwash yarn growth works, but I'm hoping to, learn more with experience. So as I mentioned, I was planning on making a folded brim. I decided not to do that anymore for a few things. One was to conserve yarn, and 2 was my dad said it was already really warm. Because I made it in DK, that means that with the hat folded in half, it's already 2 layers of DK on your ears, which is pretty warm already. So when I decided to no longer do the folded brim, I ended up making the entire hat like exactly half and half. So half of it was gray and half of it was the gray and white. And this actually worked out really well. So I ended up cutting into the hat and adding 4 more inches of the gray and white section, and that perfectly balanced things out. It just worked out really well like that. And so what I did was I cut into the hat, got all the loops back onto the needles, did 4 inches of stockinette, and then did the Kitchener stitch all around. That broke me a little bit. I think it was definitely not perfect, but I think it ended up working out in the end, and I think it looks really nice. It was really cute. My dad was wearing the hat basically the whole time after I made it for him, and I think it looks really good on him. This was actually the reason why I made knit presents for all my family in the first place, because my dad asked me to make him a hat, so I'm really glad that I was able to do that. Lastly, I made the Oslo hat by petiteknit for my brother. I used the Sewrella Spring Collection yarn in the color Cypress, which is a green. I also, surprise, surprise, ran out of yarn. I added in 2 minis, one in the same color and one in a slightly different color. I used the slightly different color on the inside where you wouldn't see it. Something that still surprised me was that I still ran out of yarn. The pattern is supposed to use 150 grams, and I had 150 grams because the main skein was 110 grams plus 220 gram skeins. I had 150 grams. But I ended up running out of yarn, and I had to do some hacks toward the end. So for the last decreases, I used a smaller needle to make smaller stitches, and I also did the very last few rows in holding the yarn single instead of double. So the top of the hat, I guess, is a little bit weaker than the rest of it. I'm hoping it doesn't break. If it does, I'll just fix it for my brother. I'll figure out how to do that. But I was a little disappointed that I still ran out of yarn. I think this is probably a lesson in maybe if I'm not using the exact yarn that the pattern recommends, that I should get a little bit extra. I think probably maybe the yardage and weight was just ever so slightly different than the yardage and weight of the yarn that was recommended in the pattern. I'm not really sure. So I also had to frog this one at the beginning because my gauge was way too big. I sized down a needle, and then I think my gauge ended up being exactly what it needed to be. I I still felt myself knitting kind of tight to try to meet gauge. So if I were to do this again, I might just size the needle down twice just so that I could knit at a more relaxed way. Overall, this pattern was very easy to make. The pattern itself is simple. I think it's just hitting gauge and not running out of yarn that was really messing with me. Yeah, those are the 4 projects. I learned a lot from it. I need to be prepared with more yarn. I need to get better at measuring gauge for wearables. And that said, I think I'm very proud of what I was able to accomplish. I did this as a 1-year celebration of knitting. I learned to knit like the day after Thanksgiving last year, so it's really cool to me that I was able to make gifts for all my family 1 year later. The reason why I gave my family these presents over Thanksgiving is because we're here in the Philippines now and it is very warm here, and I thought it would be nicer to finish the presents and gift them to my family in New York where it was a lot colder. I've just been loving seeing my family wear them, and I'm hoping to make a lot more things for them in the future. By the way, my hope is that you're listening to this in the background while you're working on your own knitting. I personally love knitting while listening to knitting podcasts, so my hope is that you do the same. If you are working on something, please leave a comment. Let me know what you're working on. I'd love to hear from you. I respond to everyone in my comments. Also, if you have your own knitting podcast, can you let me know too? I have found it pretty easy to make friends on TikTok, but I haven't really figured out how to make friends on YouTube, because when people subscribe to you, you don't know who they are unless you make your profile public. So yeah, if you have a knitting YouTube, please let me know. So in other news on my projects, I put my folklore cardigan in the dryer for the first time. I think I made a few people mad on TikTok about it. Maybe people who don't know that it's recommended that superwash gets put in the dryer sometimes to shrink it back to size. I used Knit Pick Swish DK for this cardigan, and they say to machine wash cold and tumble dry low. I also posted this on all of my accounts, and Knitpicks liked it and reposted it, so I'm pretty sure it's okay to put this in the dryer. I did this because it stretched out quite a lot while I was wearing it all the time for the past several weeks. So when I put it in the dryer, it came back to size in terms of length. I think the sleeves are a little bit long still, but maybe I just knitted them too long. I'm not really sure. But the stitches definitely all look really good still. You can see that there is a bit of pilling. I'm not actually sure if that's from the dryer or if that's just because I've been wearing this so much. So I do need to do a round of depilling on this, but I just love this cardigan so much. So the pilling is really just because I wear it all the time. So I think it's expected that there's a bit of wear and tear. I just need to do a little bit more care on it. Something I didn't mention in the last podcast was that I did alter the Amy Gunderson pattern ever so slightly to make it look more like the original cardigan. So one thing I did was I switched from doing 5 buttons to 3 buttons, which is what the original cardigan has. I also noticed that the Amy Gunderson sample had a much thinner button band than the original cardigan. So what I did was I just added another 2 rounds of ribbing onto the button band to make it look closer to the original. But other than that, I stuck to the pattern. So for a semi-finished object, I have this baby blanket that I'm working on for my friend. This is what it looks like. The reason why I say semi-finished is because this is what the back looks like. So about this pattern, I drafted this myself. I used 6 colors of hobbii baby cotton, and I made mitered squares that are 24 by 24 stitches. And I did a join as you go for them. I drafted up the pattern to see the color combination on Google Slides actually, and then I knew I wanted to make a border, and it took me a few iterations before I figured out how to make a border that wasn't going to have any of the colors touch. So this is what I came up with. I used 4 colors for the border, and I did it in this kind of off-centered pattern so that none of the colors would touch. I really like the way that this turned out. The way I did the joining means that the front of the blanket has all of these clean edges, and then the back of the blanket has all of the edges of the squares raised in a way that looks like braids around each of the squares, which I think also looks nice. For new cast-ons, I'm excited to show the beginning of my Snowy Pines wrap, a pattern by Hannah Knotwell. I saw this on Instagram and I thought it just looked so cool. And so I knew that I had to make it with the yarn advent that I ordered. So earlier in the year, I ordered a yarn advent from Loco. The theme is called the Botanical Fade Advent. These are the color themes that were kind of teased at the beginning of the year, and I thought it looked really cool, so I wanted to order it. I've also never done a yarn advent before, so this is my first one, and it's been really exciting. This is the beginning of the project. It's only the first like 2.5 colors. I have been having a lot of fun learning this lace pattern. It is more intricate than anything I've made before, but I really like it, and I am learning a lot from it. I've been enjoying opening up the yarns every day. Let me show you what I have so far. So I'm currently filming on December 18th. I have opened up all of them until yesterday. I have a few of them that are wound up right now. I think these are day 6 to 15 in order, and I think they just look so nice. I love pink, I love purple. I think these are gonna blend so well. And something that I love about colors from Loco is that I think that the color changes are never jarring. I feel like they're all pretty smooth and very pleasant. I think they're not very color blocky. They're a lot more faded and like speckly in a way that I like. I think the colors are blended together in a way that is just so pleasant, and I think she really knocked it out of the park with the theme. I really think these are giving floral, these are giving botanical, and overall, I just really like these colors. They're all fingering weight skeins in the merino sock base, which is an 80-20% superwash merino nylon. It's 2-ply fingering and 400 yards per 100 grams. So as I said, I'm on day 3. I'm not rushing this project. I really love this yarn, so I want to take my time with it. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm working on this like halfway into next year. I just want to spend the time with the yarn that I want to. My next cast on is a pair of socks. At work, we did a Secret Santa sock exchange. I suggested that if they wanted, they could get me a set of sock yarn of their choosing. So they did just that. This is what they ended up getting. It's Patons Kroy sock yarn, and it's in the color Purple Haze. I really like it. I mentioned I love pink, I love purple, and this has grays and blacks in it too, which I think is very cool. I'm working on the I'm So Basic cuff down pattern from Summerly Knits. It is a beginner friendly pattern. I'm doing them 2 at a time because I definitely don't have the powers to combat second sock syndrome. This is one of the most basic patterns that everybody follows, but I've actually never done a cuff down sock. I was always afraid of, running out of yarn, but I think with this time, knock on wood, that I will have enough yarn for this. I have 50 grams of each skein. I was a cuff down sock hater for a long time, mostly because I just didn't really like the way a heel flap and gusset looks, but it's growing on me. And also I've heard that the heel flap and gusset fits really well. So I am doing that for the first time, and I will show you how that goes. This has been a really nice travel project. I worked on it on the plane. I've been working on it just like while waiting around here. And yeah, I've been really liking working on this. For acquisitions, I somehow bought quite a bit of yarn in November. I did use a lot of yarn in November, but not quite as much as I bought. So I'm hoping to change that sometime soon. But anyway, I thought I'd show. I mentioned in the last podcast that I was going to buy Make It Tweed for my Monday sweater. So here that is. I think I got 3 of these. It's the rainbow color that I'm going to be adding in to look like confetti onto the sweater. This is technically a lace weight, I believe. It's 50 grams, 445 meters. And I think this is all synthetic, 35% viscose, 35% acrylic, 30% polyamide. And this is in the color Party, but I think this is the original color of Make It Tweed. It is color number 1. The second thing I bought was the Urth yarns that I already used up for my dad's hat. As I said, it's 16 fingering colors N50 and N100. I actually really loved working with this yarn. It is so soft. It's softer than any yarn I've ever worked with, even though I've worked with other 100% merino wools before, but this one is just softer, and I don't know why. If anyone knows, let me know. But it was $18 for each 50 gram skein, which is, more than I want to spend for yarn, but it was a special occasion. It was a gift from my dad. I'm not going to make a habit of buying this yarn, but maybe for special occasions. One weird thing I had about using this yarn was that the white skein that I bought, for some reason, only had 40 grams and it should have been 50. I weighed it when I got home. I emailed customer service and they didn't get back to me that I know of. So I don't really know what happened. I don't know if it was just like a quality control issue, or I've heard that people sometimes buy yarn, use some of it, and then return it, which is like pretty shady. I hope nobody did that to my local yarn store, but yeah, I don't know what happened. There was definitely 10 grams missing. I measured it so many times. The other thing I bought from that same trip, I haven't used it yet, but it is a uneek sock set. It is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, 220 yards per 50 grams. I am hoping to make a pair of socks with this. I also bought quite a bit of yarn during Black Friday. I bought from Sewrella's Oopsie sale, and I also bought some Knit Pick Stroll, I believe. I will talk more about these yarns when I actually unbox them. I do this thing where I track how much yarn I purchase and how much yarn I use every month. The numbers can get embarrassing, but I want to be transparent about it, and I also want to, keep myself accountable and make sure I know how much I'm consuming and using, because I think that should hopefully guide the way that I shop in the future. I think November was maybe a special month because of the Black Friday sales. I bought yarn that I think I'll be using for many months to come. I also have projects in mind for all of them, but they will take, longer than a month to use. So there is that. But that said, I think I could work on buying less yarn. So the numbers for November are, in November, after working on that baby blanket and the 4 presents and a little bit on this other crochet project I didn't talk about, I used 576 grams of yarn. That is almost 6 full skeins. I'm very proud of that. I think that's cool that I was able to use that much yarn. I think that was a very productive month for me. That said, the amount of yarn that I purchased was 2,889 grams of yarn. The reason why there's an 89, I think, is because I weighed the Urth yarn and there was that quality control issue, but this is ultimately 2,900 grams of yarn that I purchased, about 29 skeins. Like I said, I have projects planned for all of this yarn. It's a lot. I don't plan on buying this much yarn every month, definitely not. I don't plan on buying this much yarn for a very long time. So my delta for the month is a positive 2,313 grams of yarn. I am hoping to get this number sometime to be closer to 0 or negative for the next few months. I don't know if I'll be able to do that in December. I definitely already bought some yarn. What keeps happening is that I feel like I am definitely Sewrella's target demographic. I like hand-dyed yarns. I love Taylor Swift. I love their aesthetic. I love the way that she does her Instagram posts. I think that I get got by Sewrella a lot. I actually actively try not to follow too many yarn companies because I get got by Instagram just like so much. So yeah, more updates on that next month. So I've been spending a lot of time working on this channel. I have been really loving every minute of it. It is eating a bit into my knitting time, so I'm hoping to get a little bit faster at editing. I also am hoping to not just check my analytics every 5 minutes the way I've been. I feel like that's not healthy, but I just get so excited when even one person watches my video. So if you're here at the end, thank you so much for watching and supporting my YouTube journey. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.